Unit 3. Well connected. Section 1. Listening comprehension. 1. Listen to the following passages and then decide whether the following statements are true or false.
1. Modern cyberspace is a deadly, festering swamp, teeming with dangerous programs such as viruses, worms, Trojan horses, and licensed Microsoft software that can take over your computer and render it useless.
2. Cluster bombs are weapons that spread a large number of smaller bomblets over a broad area to halt troops or vehicles massing for attack.
3. Michael Weisskopf, who works for Time magazine, is an award-winning correspondent based in Washington. He covers national politics and investigations and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 1996 for national reporting.
4. Unlike their counterparts in Japan, most of whom are relatively isolated in Okinawa, most of the 37,000 American troops in South Korea are still stationed, half of a century after the end of the Korean War, in the country's two most high-profile locations, along the demilitarized zone with North Korea and in the heart of Seoul, the capital.
5. Like Sullivan, Wright had little patience with institutions. He left high school during his senior year, but was accepted at the University of Wisconsin as a special student in civil engineering. This too proved a short tour, lasting less than 2 years.
6. Agricultural research will support agriculture as a positive economic, social, and environmental force, and will help the sector to fulfill ever-evolving demands. These include further gains in food and fiber production, and such other benefits as enhanced public health, environmental services, rural amenities, and community well-being.
7. The benefits of such practices have economic, social, political, and cultural components. IT-enabled creative practices have the potential to extend benefits broadly, not only to economic and cultural elites, where they are most immediately obvious, but also to the disadvantaged, and not only to the developed world, but also to developing countries.
8. And their impacts extend in two directions. Just as the engagement of IT helps shape the development of inventive and creative practices, so also can inventive and creative practices positively influence the development of IT.
9. No intellectual domain of economic sector has monopoly on creativity. It manifests itself often unpredictably in multiple fields and contexts, but the manifestations vary in form and character, in associated terminology, and in the types of benefits that result.
10. In science and mathematics, the most fundamental outcome of creative intellectual effort is important new knowledge. Generally, scientists and mathematicians are clear on the difference between such knowledge and that which results from incremental advances within established intellectual frameworks. Groundbreaking discovery is widely, though not universally, regarded as a product of great value in itself, but it is also valued more pragmatically as an enabler of technological innovation. 2. Choose the one answer that best fits the meaning of the statement you have heard.
1. Accurate systems for monitoring fires would have enormous value if such systems could predict how a wildfire was likely to behave. That would be even better. It would enable those in charge to decide which areas should be evacuated and how best to deploy firefighters and their equipment.
Two, fires depend on fuel in the form of the plants they burn. Among the tasks of Earth observation satellites currently in orbit are to assess how combustible that fuel is by measuring its moisture content, and to provide regular updates of conditions in areas that might be at risk from fire.
3. For 100 years or so after his death, the musical consensus in Europe was that Hector Berlioz was a crazy man who defied all the rules of composition. But the Frenchman's music obeyed its own rules and sounded like no one else's.
Four, learning is a basic, adaptive function of humans. More than any other species, people are designed to be flexible learners and active agents in acquiring knowledge and skills. Much of what people learn occurs without formal instruction. But highly systematic and organized information systems, reading, mathematics, the sciences, literature, and the history of a society require formal training, usually in schools.
5. The development of creative methodologies for assessing infants' responses in controlled research settings has done much to illuminate early learning. Scientific studies of infants and young children have revealed the relationships between children's learning predispositions and their emergent abilities to organize and coordinate information, make inferences, and discover strategies for problem solving.
6. A fundamental tenet of modern learning theory is that different kinds of learning goals require different approaches to instruction. New goals for education require changes in opportunities to learn. The design of learning environments is linked to issues that are especially important in the processes of learning, transfer, and competent performance. Those processes, in turn, are affected by the degree to which learning environments are student-centered, knowledge-centered, assessment-centered, and community-centered.
7. Sheer shortages of fresh water are not the only problem. Fertilizer runoff and chemical pollution threaten both water quality and public health. More than 1/5 of freshwater fish stocks are already vulnerable or endangered because of pollution or habitat modification.
8. The most serious immediate challenge is the fact that more than 1 billion people lack access to safe drinking water, while half of humanity lacks adequate sanitation. In many developing countries, rivers downstream from large cities are little cleaner than open sewers. The health impact is devastating.
9. Some students of foreign policy like to categorize countries by the personality of their people. By that measure, Norsemen of a millennium ago were greedy psychopaths, fierce warriors, pillagers, and traders. The Vikings sacked Paris in 861, conquered much of England and northern France, settled Iceland and Greenland, discovered America, and even helped to raid Baghdad.
10. The very existence of nuclear weapons gives rise to the pursuit of them. They are seen as a source of global influence and are valued for their perceived deterrent effect. And as long as some countries possess them, or are protected by them in alliances, and others do not, this Asymmetry breeds chronic global insecurity. Section 2. Reading. Not so deaf as those that will not hear. Prompts. The article describes changes in the public attitudes and behavior towards smoking and drinking, and notes the patterns along social orders. It is true that the government's health messages are becoming increasingly strident, but are they any more effective by simply shouting louder? Time for a quick one. If you smoke, you'd better hurry. From July 1st, pubs all over England will, by law, be no smoking areas. So will restaurants, offices, and even company cars, if more than one person uses them. England's smokers are following a well-trodden path. The other 3 bits of the United Kingdom have already banned smoking in almost all enclosed public spaces. And there are anti-smoking laws of varying strictness over most of Western Europe. The smoker's journey from glamour through toleration to suspicion is finally reaching its end in pariah status. Michael Marmot, a professor of epidemiology at University College London, recalls that during his medical training in the 1960s, his teacher would say, "What's the point in telling people about the dangers of smoking? You can't get anyone to give up." How wrong they were. Most smokers have already heeded public health messages and stubbed out. In the 1950s, 2/3 of British men smoked, and they lit up all over the place. Now only a quarter do, and most enclosed public places went smoke-free voluntarily years ago. But behind this public health success story lies a darker tale. Poorer people are much more likely to smoke than richer ones, a change from the 1950s, when professional and laborers were equally keen. Today, only 15% of men in the highest professional classes smoke, but 42% of unskilled workers do. Despite punitive taxation, 20 cigarettes cost around £5, $10, 3/4 of which is tax. 55% of single mothers on benefits smoke. The figure for homeless men is even higher. For hard drug users, it is practically 100%. The message that smoking kills has been heard, it seems, but not by all. Having defeated the big killers of the past, want, exposure, poor sanitation, governments all over the developed world are turning their attention to diseases that stem mostly from how individuals choose to live their lives. But the same deafness afflicts the same people when they are exhorted to abjure other sorts of unhealthy behavior. The lower down they are on practically any pecking order, job prestige, income, education, background, the more likely people are to be fat and unfit and to drink too much. That tempts governments to shout ever louder in an attempt to get the public to listen. And nowhere do they do so more stridently than in Britain. One reason is that pecking orders matter more than in most other rich countries. Income distribution is very unequal, and the unemployed, disaffected, ill-educated rump is comparatively large. Another reason is the frustration of a government addicted to targets, which often aim not only to improve something, but to lessen inequality in the process. A third is that the National Health Service is free to patients, and picking up the tab for those who have arguably brought their ill health on themselves grows alarmingly costly. The smoking ban is an example of the official excess of zeal. Many of the places covered by the new law are already smoke-free, churches for example, but they all must display prominent no smoking signs or else face penalties that are far heavier than those for lighting up. Sign miscreants may have to pay as much as £1,000 against £200 for a rebel smoker. Warnings about the dangers of drinking are likewise becoming more shrill. On June 5th, the Department of Health published a national alcohol strategy, which sets out to make drunkenness as socially unacceptable as smoking has become in most circles. At the end of May, it told booze producers to put health warnings on bottles and cans, and threatened legislation if they did not comply. A few days earlier, it toughened its advice to pregnant women. Though no medical research dictated a change, the message had been that a couple of small drinks a week were all right. Now women are told to avoid alcohol entirely from the day they start trying to conceive until their babies are born. That stridency may be pointless, even counterproductive. There is no reason to believe that those who ignore measured voices will listen to shouting. It irritates the majority who are already behaving responsibly, and it may also undermine all government pronouncements on health by convincing people that they have an ultra-cautious margin of error built in. Such hectoring may also be missing the root cause of the problem, according to Mr. Marmot, who cites research on groups as diverse as baboons in captivity, British civil servants, and Oscar nominees. The higher rates of ill health among those in most modest walks of life can be attributed to what he calls the status syndrome. People in privileged positions think they are worth the effort of behaving healthily and find the willpower to do so. More directly, higher status itself protects people's health, he argues, not just by reducing their propensity to behave riskily, but also by changing their body chemistry in ways that protect them against disease. The implication is that it is easier to improve a person's health by weakening the connection between social position and health than by targeting behavior directly. Some public health experts talk of changing an environment where the worst choices are the easiest to make, especially for those without the time and money to seek out better ones. Supermarkets crammed with ready meals, happy hours in pubs, roads too dangerous for children to walk to school. Others speak of social cohesion, support for families, and better education for all. These are bigger undertakings than a bossy ad campaign, but more effective and quieter.